Well, hey, welcome to our 20th edition of On the Offense, which is a
Yeah,
podcast we've been doing. We try to make it topical. We sometimes do it ourselves, just me and of course John Clendenning, my esteemed business partner.
I thought,
But today we have the benefit of being joined by two legends of the field, and I say that with all sincerity. We've got Tom Martin, who is pretty much a Hall of Famer with regard to communications. Cut his teeth at ITT, developing a world-class function there. Now he's at the College of Charleston, um, where he's established a center for communications excellence. And he's also been very active in the Arthur Page Society, Arthur W. Page Society, for many years and even served as president. On the other hand, we've got Tom Mattia, who John and I know really well because he was our boss. And he's someone I respect greatly. Anytime people ask me, well, who's your mentor? Who was the person who influenced your career the most? It doesn't take me too long to come up with that name. So, Tom, I really appreciate everything you've done for me over the
well,
years.
well said. I feel the same way. The very first guest. Don't mean to cut you off, Jeff, but just a quick aside here. The Jeff, you tell me if I have this right. I think the first time we had a guest
Hmm.
on our podcast was our fifth or sixth, where we had Smooch Reynolds,
Yes, we did have some.
right? Who is the recruiter who recruited all three of us and a handful of others to EDS around the same time in that magical summer of 2000. And I feel the same way, Tom Mattia, about you. You're my guy. You when I think of my mentors, people, especially people who I've come across at multiple stages of my career and life, I think of you and Smooch, basically. And so I would echo what Jeff says. We appreciate you very much. It is beyond thrilling to have both of you here. We're just it for our viewers. If Jeff and I look a little deer in the headlights, that's because we're essentially in the presence of communications royalty. We really are, and that goes for both Tom M's here. I'm not sure how we're going to handle that as we go here, Jeff, but
Well, they do have different middle initials, which we've learned.
thank God for that. But back to you.
No, no, and a little bit on Tom's background. He started off as a journalist, and then he moved on, spent many a year at IBM where he kind of learned the craft. Moved on to do some great things. You were at Ford Motor Companies through Lincoln Mercury before you headed to EDS, where you had a great influence on our department and on John and me, of course, on our professions. And then you went on from there, Chief Communications Officer at Coca-Cola. Talk about a job. Um, and then to Yale, where he headed communications. And finally, I guess you went on to become chairman of Edelman in China. So those were great stops along the way. You're on the board at Peabody Awards. Now you've had a full career, but you still have a lot of wisdom to give. So that's kind of our motto here, wisdom. We're all about wisdom.
I
And
love
don't be afraid to retire.
it. Don't be afraid to retire. Okay, I love it. It does,
There's yeah, no fear.
does sound like a nice concept.
It's a great concept.
Yeah.
So
You
so
know, my
what
weeks are my weeks are 6 Saturdays and a Sunday.
But you still stay
I like
abreast.
that. That's a great philosophy because it's always 5 o'clock somewhere, right? Uh,
Right.
anyway, our theme this week is mentorship, and it's topical. We try to keep these somewhat topical with regard to what's going on in the world, what's going on in the news. Well, the school year's begun. Clearly, our profession, journalism, free press, a lot of different challenges right now, and we think there's probably no important concept out there that's more important than having great mentors. You don't take over the helm of an aircraft in flight if you haven't flown one before without the guidance of someone who's been there, done that, cut his or her teeth, and is credentialed. And I think you can say that about both these gentlemen, which we're so happy you've joined us. So I'll just put this out there for both of you. What in your life, as you were coming up in the profession and you've gained such great status in the profession, How important was mentoring to you? Did you have certain people you modeled yourselves after um, that gave you a full understanding of the profession and why freedom of the press is so valuable and why we need this upcoming crop of journalists? Is there anyone who comes to mind, or can you just give us your perspective on that?
I'll start only because I recently lost one of my mentors, Fred Smith. I
Oh,
spent my first 18 years at FedEx.
yeah.
I joined on my 18th, I joined on my 25th birthday in 1978 when FedEx was just 4 years old, 5 years old.
Mm.
And so really the first big figure that I was associated with was Fred. And the good news is I was able to start writing for him, writing speeches for him when I
Mm.
was about 27, I think. I'd been there for a year or two and learned so much from him. But one of the things that he asked me to do was to start sitting in the senior management meetings and taking notes. And then I would, take those notes, skinny them down, give them to him. He would edit them heavily, usually, and then send them around to the senior management team. And that was like getting an MBA.
Yeah.
Just sitting there, here I am in my 20s, listening, watching, and here's this company that's going from being truly an unknown company. I'd never heard of FedEx. I lived in Memphis, and they had just a few planes, a few people. My employee number was one of the first 10,000. I was employee number 9295. Today, I just learned today that recently, when at Fred's memorial service, they had employee number 6 million stand up and give a testimonial. That's how many people they've hired
Good heavens.
over the 50 years. At any rate, Fred was a tremendous teacher and leader. And but the thing that made him special was he really he focused on the personal side of people. And just as an example, he turned 80 last August, a year ago, August, and I sent him a note. I hadn't talked to him in a while, and just said happy 80th birthday, et cetera. And he sent me a note back, and he remembered my wife's name. She also had worked at FedEx, and he knew her, and he remembered my kids' names. And this is a guy, I hadn't seen in a long time. Hadn't been at FedEx for 30 years, so I think he was one of the great teachers early in my career.
Well,
Tom?
unlike Tom, who's had some consistency in his employment over the years, mine's a bit more checkered. So I've had a few people along the way. Jack Steele was my first city editor on
Mm.
my first newspaper job. And Jack told me, I said, "So why are you here?" And I mumbled something about Woodward, Bernstein, you know, press freedom, da 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 da. And he looked at me and he said, "Kid, you'd be better off selling condoms door to door. You'd make more money and you'd meet a better class of people." Um, and he was sort
Ah,
of right. Um, but it gave me a feel for the fact that, newspaper work is going to be pretty gritty, and it is. It remains that way today. And you really have to want to do it. You have to have some real guts. You have to stand up to people. You have to ask tough questions if you're really going to make it work. Um, and you have to have good editors, which for me is one of the things I worry about today.
mm.
Um, it's great to have citizen journalists. It's great to have independent journalists. Right now, they're doing a great job, I think. Things like the Midas Touch, those
Yeah.
guys are filling a slot that corporate media has sort of backed away from, unfortunately. But the lack of having an editorial presence that really, because an editor is much more than is your comma in the right place. Um, an
Yeah.
editor is about, have you thought through this? Have you asked this question? Have you gone to, really making you work the story? And I think you guys know by the time we were working together, that's what I did the most. People would create,
Yeah.
and my job was to say, all right, I'm looking at this. Here's my questions. And where are we going with this? And how does this fit with the strategy we have for whatever the issue might be? So I think that really stuck with me for a long time, and does today. It's really that editorial presence, I think, is really important. Um, and for younger people like Caroline, like my daughter Mary, who are, so in Mary's case, in her mid 30s, um, dealing with AI is going to be
Mm. Oh
the
yeah.
next big challenge for them. And how do you position yourself as a human being?
Right.
What's the value you bring to that information chain, as opposed to what AI is going to bring to it, which, I mean, AI, when it gets good enough, will know where the comma goes. But, you know, a lot of writing is going to end up with that AI bot. And we have to be better at saying that editorial presence needs to sit over top of it.
Yeah. Yeah. The AI. I mean, I don't, Jeff, are there any podcasts we do when AI doesn't come up? I mean, it's
No, no,
believable.
not at all. And Tom, Mattia, you're right. AI has to be supervised by a human before AI starts to supervise itself and makes everybody irrelevant. So,
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm telling my students at the College of Charleston that they need to learn it. And there have been some professors who kind of shy away from it or say don't use it. They're worried about plagiarism. I don't say that at all. I say, look, if you don't know how to use it, you're not going to get hired when you graduate.
mhm.
You've got. I said, but if you use it to think for you, you won't stay hired because if you use it as a crutch, you won't be able to walk. And so what I tell them is use it and then tell me how you used it and how you've made it better, how you've taken what it told you and then made that even better. And I think more professors are starting to do that. They're starting to say, use it wisely, but use it because everybody else is going to be using it. I just this morning, today, I saw Page Society did a program on AI and specifically on how it's affecting generative optimization.
Mm.
And the thing that came out of it, which relates to Tom Mattia's point about journalism, journalism is still one of the most trusted places that AI turns for citation. But here's the problem: journalism itself is eroding, both at the
Mhm.
local level and at the national level. And so, if AI is depending on journalism to feed its content, then where's that coming from? And how reliable is that journalism? So we are in a very different time now, and I think you're right, Tom. It's going to only continue to change
Well,
rapidly.
and Tom, there's this, I mean, now polling, there's a whole, you probably know this, there's a whole nascent industry now around synthetic polling, where where you're using synthetic agents acting as the poll takers, because it's quicker, easier. A lot of data points create an agent, and you multiply those agents, and then you poll those agents, and things can be done really quickly. But you're you're getting an answer that at least I would question.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's what is the human element that manages that? And getting back to journalism and public relations, it's understand AI, but understand how to manage AI and use AI, um, because otherwise you won't have a job. I mean, AI is going to start writing. It's going to be tough entry level, I think, or entry level becomes a different animal than it's been traditionally. Because you don't need researchers that much anymore. You need one person with a good bot to do your research, but you need that person who can sort through that.
Mhm.
I think it
Yeah.
also gets back to authenticity and whether it's the authenticity of brands. I think people are questioning how believable, how credible brands and services are that are being sold by companies. And AI doesn't change that. I mean, AI can say all it wants to say, but if you use a product or service and it doesn't work, if your insurance company doesn't honor its claim, or if your car company doesn't stand behind its product, then you've still got a problem. And so I think it probably is more important to be authentic in what you provide to consumers than maybe it's ever been.
Yeah, I agree.
No question. By the way, Tom Martin, I'm actually sitting here in like a faculty meeting room at the University of North Texas where I teach. And this came up, AI literally just came up in my morning lecture. And I do the same thing you do, you know, embrace it for all it's worth, right? Don't use it as a crutch. I like the way you put that, but embrace it, right? I think that's the only way to do it. I really do.
John,
Yeah, I
let
mean,
me,
I tell students, I said, if you're using AI to think for you, where that's going to fail you is when you're in your first big job interview and, they ask you a tough question and you can't pull out your phone and say, Wait just a second. I'll give you an answer in a minute." You can't go to Chat GPT when you're on the spot. So,
and I think it's more than embrace. You have to learn to manage it. I mean, it's going to be, it's
Yeah.
you or the bot, buddy. It's you or the bot. Are you going to manage the bot or is the bot going to manage you? Because that bot's going to keep getting smarter every day. So are you going to keep getting smarter? And are you going to be able to bring added value to what the bot produces? I mean, that's the race.
You
And
know what?
so
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, so it's to me, it's more than embracing it. It's understanding that that's the reality you live in. Now, how do you get a leg up on that?
You know what? I am really glad we're recording this, Jeff, for a variety of reasons. One
Okay.
is I'm going to use that line, Tom. I mean, I'll go back and look at the recording. It's you or the bot, basically. So I really, really like that. Let me ask another question. I love the Fred Smith story, Tom Martin. I've encountered, at least electronically, lots of folks in the last few weeks and months who feel very similar about Fred Smith. And it's all positive and really heartwarming to see. And so I guess my question is, what makes a good mentor? I mean, you take the Fred Smith case and the fact that he knows your wife's name and your kids' names and stuff like that, brought you into the executive meeting. Does it start with that, just giving you a chance to get exposed to certain things, being good at the personal side of things? What makes a really good mentor?
I mean, I think we've actually done research on this at the Martin Center. The Martin Center, which I founded back in 2023, that's our sole focus is on sort of the science behind mentoring and mentorship and what makes good mentors and good mentoring relationships. And one of the biggest things is empathy. It's really putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're mentoring. And to some degree, it works both ways because I think a good mentee also tries to put him or herself in the shoes of the person mentoring them and realize they have something to offer that person as well. But getting, in Fred's case, he was never afraid to give credit to others. And I'll give you just one example. One of the biggest moments of my young career was when I wrote a speech for him that he was giving in London, and he let me come with him. We flew on the Concorde, which I got to, do that, which was cool. We stayed at the Dorchester Hotel, which was also cool for a kid from Memphis, Tennessee, who'd never been to London. But at the end of the speech, there was a dinner, and it was a very formal dinner with a bunch of captains of industry all sitting around the table. And at the end of the dinner, they passed around the port, and the guy was explaining to me the port goes this way and all this sort of thing. But at the very end of it, they gave a toast to Fred, and Fred said, "I want to turn that around." He said, let's raise our glass to Tom Martin because he put this presentation together and did a great job. Let's, hear," and everybody raised their glasses. Well, trust me, that was many years ago, and I'll never forget it. And
Yeah.
that's just an example of what I think good mentors do is they don't steal the limelight, they share it. And then Fred was excellent at doing that.
Yeah, so as far as like CEOs I worked for who were that way, Neville Isdell at Coca-Cola was very much that way, and he had a similar situation. He won the annual award at the Clinton Global Initiative when that was up and running, um, and they presented him the award, and he stopped and called me up on the stage and said, "This is really the guy who, you know, got me to move in this direction, got us to where we wanted to go. So, and I agree with Tom. It's something I've carried with me all the time. It's if you're if you're a leader, you're when things go right, it's all your people. When things go wrong, it stops with you. That's just the way it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, your people trust you and believe in you and are willing to take risks that they won't take if you're, you know, willing to leave them by the side of the road. Um, and that then engenders, you know, some really good work, I think, because you need some risk takers. And you need to be there to sort of manage that risk, but you want to grow that, and you want to understand that you're never the smartest person in the room. You don't want to be. The worst place is to be in a room full of people where you are the smartest person. You really want to be in a room full of people where you're not, and where you're not necessarily the most important person. I think those are so that mentoring is important. And Tom, you hit on a really the most important point, which is you always learn. Both sides learn. And if you to be a good mentor, you have to be open to learning from your mentee because you will. I mean,
And
I taught a class in transmedia storytelling, and I stopped teaching it because the platforms got so it was how do you tell unified stories across multiple platforms? And there were just more platforms popping up. I just got tired of chasing the platforms. But I learned more. I learned so for me, what I taught my students, I think, was the idea of what a story is. What's an arc? How do you use a story to make your point? How do you use a story to protect you to further your brand or whatever? But a story is important because people remember stories. So I taught them the idea of a story, but they taught me all about how the platforms can be used to then tell those stories.
You know,
I love it.
one of the things we're trying to help our students and the students who are in the Martin Scholars Program who each are assigned a mentor. You know, one of the things we try to impress upon them is mentoring comes in a lot of different flavors. The president of the college, Andrew Shue, president of the College of Charleston, he was on. I do a podcast too. My podcast is on mentoring, no surprise, and he was the first guest of that on that podcast. And he talked about two of the mentors in his life were just coworkers who took an interest in him. One suggested he consider going into management, and he did, and liked it. And the other one, when he got into the academic side, suggested he look into being a dean, and he did, and ultimately became a provost, and now he's a president of a college. And he said, without those two people in his life, neither of whom were assigned to him or formal mentoring programs, he wouldn't be president of the College of Charleston. So I think looking, you know, finding mentors in a lot of different places, because they can be a parent or a friend or a friend of a friend or whatever, but just finding people who know a little more than you might or about a certain subject and can help you, I think is the key. Tom, I heard one of the guests on my podcast was a woman who said, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find another room. And
Exactly.
that's totally to your point. It's you know, you want to be around people who are smarter than you are because that's how you learn.
Exactly.
No question. Uh, let's flip it. What makes a good mentee? I mean, just being open to learning. You know, just be
Well, you know, we've done a lot of research on that. As I say, we actually did a survey of there have been 111 Martin Scholar graduates, which I'm very obviously very proud of, and there are 12 in the current class. But we did a survey of all 111 graduates and got a good response rate from all of them. And you know, a couple of things emerged from that. One is, yes, they learned a lot about the breadth of the profession, which they didn't know coming in. You know, colleges are wonderful, but they don't always teach a lot about what you do when you get your degree in the real world, how the real world really works. So the program certainly helped them in that way. But the other thing was unexpected. They said what they got most from the program was being lifted up by their colleagues, by their fellow Martin scholars. That's what that's what really stuck with them, is that they finally were in a group of people where they weren't trying to beat the other person. They were trying to help the other person get better. And that person was trying to help them get better. So I think part of being a good mentee is just realizing that you have the ability to help other people. But the other thing that we found is that it's really more on the mentee to pursue that mentoring relationship than it is on the mentor. Mentors are busy people generally.
Yeah.
And mentees have to be the ones saying, "Hey, could we have a conversation, or let me share this with you, or I just got a good grade on a paper, I'd like to show it to you," or whatever. So the mentee has to be the one kind of driving the train a little bit, and that can be uncomfortable especially for a college student. But they've
Great
got
point.
to learn how to do that.
Hmm.
But that's great.
And if once you're in a work environment, that ability to mm, walk in, tug on somebody's shirt tail can be even more daunting, um, because especially if you're in a corporate environment where everyone is working their way up a ladder, whether you like it or not, everyone's working their way up the ladder.
Right.
And so there is some competition for that next good job. Um, I, I you have to be able to, and that's where I think, to Tom's point, the mentee relationship among peers becomes so important and critical if you can make it work. Um, my sort of MBA experience came with 10 years at IBM. And at the time I was there in the 80s, it was still the, biggest, best, computer company around. Um, but it was also huge. It was big. And that the communications function just at corporate headquarters was like 350 people. I mean, pretty significant.
Yeah.
Um, and and it was very hierarchical and very tracked. And if you weren't switching jobs every 18 months, you were falling behind.
Hmm.
So all of us knew that routine, but all of us knew, almost all of us understood we couldn't get through it alone. Um, and we were all of a sort of a same age group. Um, and that ability to be together, to socialize together, to see each other outside of the office, to talk about challenges, because we had the thing I love about communications is the toolkit is the toolkit.
Hmm.
You can take it any place, you can go to any industry. I mean, I'm a great example of that. You can go anywhere with it. Um, so we all had that toolkit, but we were doing different things. We were at different phases of our careers. And so to learn from each other how you're applying it, doing environmental questions versus how you're doing it, uh, doing product launches versus how you're doing it on reputational work. Um, that's where we all learned. I think Tom is right that peer to peer, and it's easier to talk to a peer. Um, and then if you're
Yeah.
lucky and you find a manager or two who enjoys the idea of, because I think that's part of it as well. Some people enjoy mentoring. You like helping people. I don't want to manage them. I like to,
Right.
so like the senior person who doesn't want to manage is often a great mentor.
No, and I think, Tom, one of the things when I joined EDS after a pretty full career, I knew how to write a press release. I knew how to come up with a strategy. I knew how to put things into action. But I was a doer. I wasn't a leader at that point. And I think one of the most important things you did for me was you taught me how to have some executive presence
Mm.
and that you're not going to be respected unless people see you as being on equal footing. And I'll never forget, some advice you gave me. I would go into meetings with, other higher ups within EDS, people, executives, and I'd go in armed with notebooks, all these notebooks I'd carry into the room, and I'd slug them down in front of everybody and take them through. And all of a sudden, I think I was viewed as kind of like the scribe,
Mm.
um, carrying the info. Where you advised me, she goes, you go, no, 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 no. You get someone who works for you to take all those things down, put them at the seats, and then you walk in with your little folder, and that's it. And you sit down and here, let's get started. And I think, the one thing that I could always say about Tom Mattia was executive presence. That's one of your true strengths.
Oh, no.
Sees you as not being confident. And I think that confidence, and if you can get people to feel that confidence in themselves is huge. So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
That
No,
is simple.
you're welcome.
That,
Never be a note taker. Here's my
exactly. One of the
come to
things,
the table with a point of view, or don't come to the table.
that's right.
But it's got to be a point of view that's informed.
Hmm.
True.
You know,
Yeah.
one of the things that it's funny that you say that mention that, because one of the things I really worry about are the number of students who are beginning their positions either remotely or in a hybrid situation. And I think one of the many bad things that COVID did is it really took away a lot of the in-person office. It's changing now. People are going back to the office more and more, but still, it's not quite like it was, in 2019. And I think where that especially hurts younger people is they don't have the opportunity just to observe, just to see how are people dressed, how do they talk, how do they carry notebooks into meetings, or do they come in,
Right,
you
right.
know? And I think that observational opportunity, I tell my students who are working remotely or who begin working remotely, I said, look, you've got to try to replicate some of the things that you would get. For example, get on Zooms 10 minutes early, and whoever's on there, just have a chat with them, or schedule non-work related meetings with people just to say, hey, I heard that you like fly fishing. Tell me more about where I could go to do some fly fishing or whatever. So I think that's something that people are going to have to learn how to do better, is just how to we try to teach our students how to network, and that's something that's so foreign to a college student. And yet we all know that networking has as much to do with success as being knowledgeable. It may be even more important. What you know is important, but who you know and how you get along with people is also very important.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that I don't have to run the race that your students and graduates are running.
Yeah.
It's I recognize it's a different space. I see it. I see it in my own kids. I see it. I did an encore program at the University of Texas called Tower Fellows. So I spent 2 years back on campus going to classes with 20-year-olds. Um, and they were, and it was, I started before COVID. COVID hit and we went online. And as I ended, we were coming back out of COVID and starting to do some stuff in person. And the difference in the context of the relationship I had with the students and my fellow students was dramatically different between the two. Um, and finding ways to do things in person. Uh, my daughter marries. The other thing is, there is so much gig work today. There is so much.
Yeah.
All three of my kids are gigging. No one has a contraction. No one has a ongoing business relationship with everyone. Everything is a gig. Everything is um, a contract as a contractor, not as an employee. Um, it's just really interesting to watch.
And
And some
my
of it
youngest
is,
son, same way. My youngest son is a communicator, and he worked for a 2 year contract with Autodesk, and he's on another contract right now. So you're
yeah,
right. Yeah, it's really a combination of remote work or hybrid work plus contract work. The back in the good old days, as we say, you went into companies, you got benefits, you got, full employment, you got nice perks. You may not have had the candy machine and all that they have now in so many workplaces, but you had better stuff, like pensions and that
mm,
sort of thing. Well, we're not going to bring that back, but I think it's up to employers to try to establish some sense of, we're doing something for you to reestablish some sense of a compact between employer and employee, in whatever way you can, because I think that's missing right now in many workplaces.
Yeah, I think I think it's a tough situation to go into. Mary got her MA at Columbia. Again, happened during COVID, so a lot of it was online. Um, but we were living in New York at the time, and we could have her cohort over so that they could spend physical time together. Um, I've ended up, still talking to a couple of them as they go through their career stuff, and having that connection's really paid off for all of them. Mary's, if I look at the three, Mary really uses, to your point about networking, Tom. So she graduated from Wellesley. There's a great Wellesley network. She uses it all the time. She's now started to use her Columbia graduate network a lot. Um, our youngest, Aurora, went to Yale. She doesn't want to do nothing with Yale, which is a shame because she's a writer, and that community would be wonderful for her. But
Yeah.
so Mary's able to progress and answer almost any question using her networks, or
Mm.
at least get a good amount of information using her networks. While Aurora just has to sort of plug along on her own, and it's harder. So yeah, getting that network and using it is important.
Yeah, no, really good point. I mean, so here's one that comes to mind. So you've got you're right, Tom Martin. I mean, uh, all these people, especially younger people, working remotely, full remote or maybe partially remote. The gig economy, Tom, Mattia, to your point, all this, people are kind of all over the place. Um, what can companies do to facilitate an environment of mentoring within that larger context, right? So by way of example, I was an adjunct last year here at UNT, but I'm now full-time. And they've assigned me a mentor, a colleague, a peer, a colleague, a fellow advertising and brand strategy professor. And he's my peer, and he calls me to check up on me. We meet. I mean, we just started school. So, but he's taking it seriously, and so am I. I find it kind of nice, to have a colleague I can turn to, right? That's just one example. But I mean, is it important for companies to facilitate mentoring by setting up formal programs and things like that?
I think it is, and I think, I mean, what you just mentioned is a great example of it. There has to be an intentionality about it. And now, my youngest son who works remotely, one of the things that the foundation he works for does is they bring him into their office once a month
Mm.
to interact with the people in real time. It's just for a day, but they pay his way there and pay his way back and all that. That's intentionality. It's saying we're going to not just treat you like someone who, is just purely a contract person. We're gonna treat you like family as much as we can. And I think having intentional programs like a mentoring program is also a good way of doing that. It may not be practical in every situation, but I think the more companies can focus on that kind of thing, the better.
Yeah, it's it as long if it can provide the platform that encourages people to do it, I think it's important. You don't want it to be overly structured. It sounds like yours isn't. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing. And it went after I joined Coca-Cola. So the other thing is HR can help if you're in a situation with HR. But after I joined Coca-Cola, I was there about 6 months, and the head of HR, who got to be a friend, said, I think it's time we do a 360 evaluation. And I said, well, I just got here and things are going fine. I got it. Don't worry, I'm fine. No, 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 it's probably a good idea. I said, no, 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 no. I mean, my people love me. Everything's okay. I'm getting along with the other. No, 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 let's do a 360. So we did. And I found out that my people um, in my organization was happy to have me, but they thought that I was removed and I wasn't listening enough to them and I wasn't taking their guidance. And that was fair because, you parachute into a new place on your own. You know who you can trust, you, and you have to build the trust with others. It's always tough. Um, but HR having that process and saying, let's go through it, then set up a situation where I could turn around and say, oh, I need to stop a minute. I need to listen. And so then we started a process of when I had to do my evaluations going down, I'd do my evaluation. And a week later, my folks would come back and evaluate me. I
Nice.
had to do it clearly first so they weren't at any risk. And
Right.
then could come back and be honest with me and their feedback to me. And that set up a situation where mentoring really, really just blossomed because we were both listening to each other. And I was certainly learning from them. Um, and it really created a great working environment. So doing something like that, I think, can really be effective.
Well,
But the
that's
other
a
thing that
great
you
word.
said, oh, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Tom.
Yeah.
That was a great word you threw out there, Tom, listening. I can remember, and I remember where you were at this point in time. You were with your family down on the Rio Grande when we had the change of control of CEOs at EDS. And, I worked throughout the night. By the time you called again, you were like 100 miles west of Abilene. But in the morning, I met Mike Jordan for the first time, who was the polar opposite of our former CEO. Mike was intellectual, so well spoken, very quiet, but very thoughtful. And, I kind of made the mistake of kind of going into this thinking, okay, he's just going to be like his predecessor. So let me assemble my 50 books of info and brief him on every single person he may talk to and blah, blah, blah. And he came in, I'm sitting there at a conference table with him. And Tom, you remember Mike was very soft spoken. Um, you knew when he wanted something. Um, but I'm going through things. He's kind of shaking his head and got to the end. I said, yeah, Mike, does that help you? He goes, yeah, but Jeff, there's a reason why God gave us two ears and one mouth. And I'll never forget that advice. I've held that with me the whole time because I think that really I use it to guide me on how I interact with others. And but you have to adjust to different styles, and that's something I've learned
Mhm.
over the years, and certainly others in my life, like you, Tom, in terms of working with different executives. There are different ways to work with different people, and you've certainly taught me that. And
We're all human beings.
Tom, I interrupted you. So what were
No,
you?
I was just gonna pick up on what John said earlier about the fact that his mentor was taking it seriously. And I think that's the other key to it. There are many mentoring programs that fail because it's just lip service. It's just, "Well, I'm gonna have lunch with you a couple of times and then I'll forget I'm being your mentor and you'll forget it and we'll just move on." But I think if people take it seriously and really look at it as something that can be helpful on both ends, then it tends to work. But there has to be a intentionality both at the organizational level and at the individual level for it to really be successful.
Yeah, guys, you remember, so EDS got to be such a difficult place to communicate in. Um, and you have a change in leadership. You got all new leaders coming in on the top. Um, and Dick and Don Yuzi were not big, warm, cuddly, friendly, let's bring all our people together kind of leaders. Um, and we were stuck with like 325,000 people, most of whom had not started their careers in EDS, most of whom had been purchased as EDS got a
Right.
contract, right? And we brought them in and they were still sitting in their same desk in their same old job working for a different company who they didn't even know. Um, and we did that one big communications program where we did storytelling. And really, it was about we got everybody not everybody, but we got many people in the company to start telling their stories about themselves and their company. And I think that really changed the dynamic inside, the way we all felt about each other and the way the business moved forward. And it allowed because people listened to other people's stories. People enjoyed telling their story, it was important to them, and other people enjoyed hearing it to understand how they fit together. Um,
I think that's really important, Tom, from a cultural perspective in communications. By doing that storytellers program, we told all those people, all our colleagues out there that, hey, what do you think about the company matters? We'd love to get your perspective. Put it on a 3x5 card and send it in to us. And that's going to give us a much richer view of how people within the business feel, not from the top, but from the middle and from the bottom and whomever, and we utilize that. But I thought that was a fantastic program.
I've got another one. I asked about mentees earlier, and Jeff, we should probably be conscious of time here as well.
Yeah.
And I want to give both Toms a chance to kind of close out with any comments that you guys would like to make. But before we get there, maybe just one last question, which is it a good thing or not if a company somehow incentivizes people to get a mentor? Can you incentivize people to seek out being a mentee? Or is that just weird? In other words, hey, we encourage you to,
incentivize how, John?
I don't know. I don't know if it's penalize them if they don't do it, but maybe there's a reward if, I don't know. It just as a way to push the concept of mentoring further for people, especially people who might be too shy to approach somebody.
I mean, my opinion would be it's better to incentivize people to become mentors and then enable the mentee to
Mm.
be persistent in trying to make the relationship work. In other words, I think if you had a bunch of people in a company running around trying to find mentors because they want to get a reward of some type, I think that could be a little bit strange. But I think if you say our organization wants to foster mentoring, and so those of you in leadership positions, we're going to ask you to actively and enthusiastically participate in this, and we're going to once we structure it, we're going to train the mentees. One of the things we learned at the college is that mentees need some training. So we actually do a 1 hour, 1 credit hour express course, 6 week course in just how to be a mentee.
Mm.
And it's everything from etiquette type stuff. How do I go to a reception and hold a plate of food and still mingle and mix with people? Or, what do I do with a business card? Or do people even have business cards anymore? So we do some training on how to be a good mentee. That helps
Mm.
them. The mentors don't need training, but they just need to be made aware of what the needs are of mentees, and then in our case, they're volunteering to do it. But I think in an organization, there could be some structural
Mm.
encouragement to do that.
I
Yeah,
love it. I love it.
Tom is more experienced doing it than I do. I would just say that I agree that the if there's any perk to it, it's to help people become mentors, um, and not necessarily only management. As I said, I think some of the best mentors are people who don't want to manage, but do want to develop.
Hmm.
Um, and so people who like to develop, it's something they can do. It's an extra piece for them. And for mentees, it's like if you have the desire to get ahead, you're gonna want to find a mentor.
Mhm.
If that desire is strong enough, I think you go out and find them, and knowing that there's a there's a program there where I can tap in and understand how to use the resource. If I want to do it, I'll go find it. I think that's good. So it's not so much a benefit. Well, it's a benefit you're providing rather than an incentive.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
It
agree.
makes
I agree with that.
uh,
Yeah, I think having a great mentoring relationship, even if you're on the mentor side, can make your performance better. I know with our team at EDS, Tom, after you left to go to Coca-Cola, I sat down with all the direct reports individually and said, you're really good at what you do, but is this what you want to be doing going on from here? Would you like to do some internal communications? Would you like to do online stuff or whatever? And I tried to just kind of create this dialogue where they could see I cared about where they're going in their careers. And I think in the end, that makes them want to work harder for you. And I always felt that way about you, Tom. You were certainly gave me a lot of different opportunities that I might not have been given. So anyway, thank you.
well, why don't we go to the two Toms, Jeff, and offer them an opportunity to close out with any comments they might have. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea.
Focusing on mentoring, um, it is a great thing to have at the core of any organization, be it a business or a nonprofit or a charity or um, or your family. Um, if it's part of the way you go about life, it makes life so tremendously fulfilling. Um, to know that you've helped someone, to know that your advice has been useful, um, really is a great human benefit to have. Um, and on the other side, to know that there are people in the world who wanted to take the time to help you move yourself along life's path, um, is also very fulfilling and very, uh, um, it gives you hope. It gives you hope for the future, which is something we all need these days.
Yes, it is.
Um, so I think both sides of mentoring are so very, very important for that. It helps us all be better human beings. Um, it helps our organizations progress. It makes our organizations healthier. Um, it more connected, more understanding of the direction we're all going in, or should be going in, or want to be going in. So I think it's a critical part that sits in the center of a healthy, thriving organization.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I appreciate the fact that you're devoting this episode of your podcast to mentoring because I do think it's a very important subject. I'll just share one story. More than 40 years ago, I was matched with a young man who at that time was 12 years old, and his name was Robert Wilson, and I was matched with him in the Big Brothers program. Well, that program was supposed to end when he was 17, but we just kind of kept going. I went to all of his graduations from high school, from college, from law school. He was an usher when I married my wife, Wanda, and I was his best man when he got married a few years later. His daughters call me Grandpa Tom. We're
Mm.
still very, very close. He's like a third son. And did I expect all that to happen more than 40 years ago when we were first matched? Of course not. But I think he and I have both gotten so much out of that that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And that is just one example of what mentoring can be. But
Mm.
I've devoted the last 18 years of my life at the college to mentoring essentially. And it's been the most rewarding chapter of my whole career. So, people, I don't think fully realize until they do it just how rewarding those kind of relationships can be for both parties.
Right.
And so I would just encourage anybody listening to your podcast to jump in the pool and take a stab at being a mentor. I think you'll find that it's extremely rewarding and can give you a dimension to your life that you didn't even know was there. So keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And you can do it from a distance. I mean, we've mentored a group of students in Africa for years, and many of them now are land rights lawyers in Tanzania and Uganda, and we communicate with them regularly. you can do it from afar as well as close in.
Wow.
Great advice.
Jeff, what do we even say to that? I mean, I just,
I got nothing. I got
I,
nothing.
you
No,
know
I,
what?
I think this has been really great, really helpful. Tom Martin, Tom Mattia, the wisdom that you guys have shown and the examples you've set, really powerful. So it just kind of makes me feel even better, John, that we put together this episode on this subject because I think it's really, really important right now, especially with the state of the world, the state of for the free press, where things go from here. We have to make sure that we've got great examples out there that people can model themselves after, that can keep the free press moving along like it has been. It's certainly a huge part of society. Um,
Well, I agree with that. This is our 20th podcast, Jeff, and I would argue that it may be our best. And you want to know why? Because you and I have spoken the least of other podcasts. And you know what? That's a good thing when you've got guys like this to turn to impart their wisdom and passion for this incredibly important topic. I mean, the driving force for this was back to school, the timing hook. And so we wanted to do something education related, even though this goes beyond education. But I actually have Jeff and I alternate. One of us does a LinkedIn executive thought piece every month, first week of the month. Mine is due to come out tomorrow. And the headline is something along the lines of summer is over, uh, but mentoring is always in season or something like that. And it sounds like it is kind of a way of life, a way of being, a way of thinking, right? Being helpful to others and being open to how others can be helpful to you. And I love your word fulfilling, Tom Mattia, on both ends of that spectrum. So I just can't thank you both enough, individually and collectively, for spending the time with us. We really, truly do look up to each of you. And we're just really excited about this conversation. Jeff, you want to close out with
uh,
our
yeah, what I would say is great players need great coaches. Michael Jordan wouldn't have done well without having Phil Jackson. You need great coaches. And certainly in the case, you guys are great coaches. And we hope to be great coaches to the people we work with. But thank you, thank you, thank you again for doing this. I think a lot of people will take a lot of great learning out of this. And I'm not sure what to say at this point other than please go to our various social network channels that we have. We're on everything. You can watch these broadcasts. You can go to our website. We've got a full list of them there. But thank you again for spending the day doing this with us. And you'll get a chance to see it online very soon.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, John and Tom. Always good to see you.
Tom, it's wonderful to see you. It's good to know we're still around. And thanks, guys. It's great seeing you guys, as always.
sounds great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.